Good morning. We are in Mark chapter 10. Then he arose from there and came to the region of Judea by the other side of the Jordan. And multitudes gathered to him again, and as he was accustomed, he taught them again. The Pharisees came and asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Testing him. And he answered and said to them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and to dismiss her." Jesus answered and said to them, "Because of the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate." In the house, his disciples also asked him again about the same matter. And so he said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." Well, maybe not coincidentally, we've already talked about this subject just recently. We were talking about the subject of divorce. And I have in my Bible a cross-reference from Matthew 19. And that's what we flipped to the other day. And in Matthew 19, we read the same thing. The Pharisees come to him, and is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? Now, this is where we start finding that in the school of Hillel, the Jews were taught, essentially you could divorce your wife for just any old reason. And some of the specific examples given, like if she overcooks your eggs, that's a reason for divorce. So that's kind of the idea. That was actually a specific example of what a wife, that's divorce grounds right there. Now, Shammai was the other school of thought. So these are rabbis that held great influence in how they taught. And Shammai was much more conservative. And he said, no, you can't divorce your wife for any old reason, like my friend Hillel over there is teaching, but only for sexual morality. You need to stick it out through thick and thin. And so this context helps us understand a lot. Last night at my church, I mentioned how when we studied the Bible, I didn't use the word hermeneutic, but it's basically like, how do you study the Bible? What is the method you use? That's the hermeneutic, to understand what the Bible's teaching. And so we talked about the literal, historical, grammatical method. And so we talked about, I take the Bible literally. So what it says is what it means. But I take history and grammar. I take cross-references, because if one verse says one thing and another verse says another thing, they can't contradict. And if we think they're contradicting, then we're looking at it from the wrong angle. And so this is where historical plays big. Because when you understand the teachings of the Jews in the first century, it doesn't change what Jesus says here, but it paints a picture, a context. Who were these Pharisees? Who were their teachers? What was their already preconceived thoughts about marriage and divorce as they come asking these questions? As we talked about last time, and so I won't go into detail on this again, but it was just not too long ago in Mark. I want to say when we did verses like 42... when we did 38 to 41. So if you want the longer version, go back and we talk about divorce a bunch there too. But when Jesus mentions only adultery, that's all he ever mentions in his ministry. And he pretty much says it only for adultery. But I mentioned in that message how yet Paul the Apostle talks about the unbeliever departing is acceptable. and that a believer is not in bondage in such cases. So is Jesus wrong? Was it more than just adultery? Because Paul says there's something. Is Paul wrong? Or is there something in the context where these are not contradicting each other? It's not that it's only adultery and Paul's saying, no, it's not only adultery. But when Jesus was addressing these men, these Pharisees, there was a specific context to their questions. And so, notice how in Matthew's gospel, he just says, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. And then again, he puts it in here in Mark's gospel, and if a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she commits. So he goes both ways. This is a two-way thing. It's not about just men to women, just women to men. But you'll notice here, this doesn't just say who you divorce and divorce is wrong. It says whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. And if a woman divorces her husband and marries another, what we're seeing happening here grammatically now, we're talking about the historical and grammatical, right, is they're attaching these two things. It's not that you're never allowed to remarry. I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. Now, again, a very kind of plain and skimming reading over these verses without taking the rest of the Bible into context, it could lead you to think that. But when you dive further in, no, what he's saying is if you divorce and remarry, like this is one action. I'm divorcing my wife because this woman over here looks better. And so I'm going to divorce and marry. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not how the whole certificate of divorce thing was supposed to work. Well, Moses said we could give him a certificate of divorce. And so what they basically were saying was like, well, Moses said give them a certificate of divorce. So if I give them a certificate of divorce, how is this adultery? I'm married to the woman. And you'll find that Christians, just like the Jews, can be very quick to justify our sin. We can find some way to justify that by some technicality, our sinful heart and our sinful desires, our sinful bad attitudes and our pride and our greed and our selfishness and selfishness, I was going to say just being full of self, we justify it with some verse or something. And well, and this is what the Pharisees were doing. They were saying, well, Moses said we could get a certificate of divorce. I'm not an adulterer. I gave my wife a certificate of divorce, and I got married to girl number B, and I was organized enough to get it all done in under a 12-hour window. And obviously, I'm not saying it has to happen the same day to qualify to be adultery, but that was the idea, was that people were getting divorced so that they could marry someone else. And Jesus is trying to say straight up, you're still in adultery. It's like, well, I'm not abusing, illegal drugs. I got a prescription. It's like, right, but are you abusing it? Doesn't matter if you have a prescription. Are you really taking something you need, or are you abusing it? Well, I can... And I don't know, what other examples come to your mind? It's like, as we think our way through, we can justify stuff by technicalities. Well, I have a prescription. Again, that doesn't mean you need something or that it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong to take prescription drugs either, right? Like, don't read into stuff. But that's the thing, is we can find technicalities that make it okay. And so here we have it. Jesus is saying that you can't just find a loophole to get out of marriage. Now, Paul does talk about the unbeliever departing and how the believer is not in bondage in such cases. And the phraseology he uses there not only says that an unbeliever can depart, but that there are such cases. There are instances where divorce is something that God is not going to be frowning upon and be upset with you. Because, let's face it, if a guy uses his wife as a punching bag for fun, well, if she sought counseling, tried to work through this, that, and the other, and it didn't work. I don't know, in that one scenario, with that one person whom I've talked to, that's the thing, I had this conversation with a friend recently, and I told him, it's a difficult subject to talk about because you never want to make an overarching statement where people feel like, oh, I can fit in there. And all I can ever really say, if you want to get down to the real serious matter, is I could only personally, as a pastor, take every case as a case-by-case basis. But I do believe you're going to find cases, like Paul speaks about in 1 Corinthians 7, where after prayer and counseling and attempts at restoration, you're going to find that there may be an unbeliever in the group who's unwilling to try and change, unwilling to repent, unwilling to this. And it might be the healthiest thing for the wife and the family to separate. And maybe over time that might turn into divorce. When Paul talks about being in bondage, I think there's an aspect of nobility to this idea. But I know many people say, well, we'll just stay married, but we won't live together. And I'll be married to this guy for the rest of my life who I don't live with and this and that because I can't get divorced and I can't ever remarry and I can't ever. And I mean, if that's what you believe God has called you to. But Paul says that Christians aren't under bondage in such cases. Some people made some poor choices. They married someone they probably shouldn't have. Now they're regretting it. Well, that doesn't mean you just get a divorce, right? You can't just get a divorce whenever you feel like it. And many people want to try and justify their selfish desire for a divorce. They're unhappy and they don't want to work at it. And well, it's tough. Life's tough. Marriage is tough, right? And so this is a two-sided coin or double-edged sword, whatever you want to call it, where you want to take people who are trying really hard and want to honor God, and they would do whatever God told them to do, and give them some peace that divorce could be something that God has for them. And on the other side, you want to make it really clear to the people who are just lazy and they're not trying and they're unwilling and they've got a lot of sin issues and heart issues. And you tell them that God says, keep working at your marriage, and they get all angry and they don't like that idea. Well, sorry. You need to stick it out. Buck up, buttercup. You got hard work to do and it's time to fight for your marriage, right? And so it's a difficult subject because who are you? Hopefully you're happily married. But when you're talking to these other people, that's why I say, well, I can't just say abuse isn't a reason for divorce. Well, I mean, she slapped me. I'm divorcing her now. And I was like, oh, give me a break, bro. You're like 3 times her size. You can take it. But that's the thing. It's like, it just depends. So I can't ever say all these reasons are okay. And I can also say the Bible seems to leave room that outside of an unbeliever saying, I want a divorce and departing, very clear, 1 Corinthians 7, and adultery, my wife had an affair, my husband had an affair, those are black and white and they're really easy, right? Those are the ones the pastor handbook covers very thoroughly. It's very simple. But beyond that, the Bible seems to make it clear that there can be such cases. But we need to take them one by one. And I have much more confidence when I'm working with at least one Christian who is sold out and devout and truly wants to honor God. But there's a problem that doesn't seem like there's a way around. and they would do whatever God told them to do. They just want to do what's right. Well, that person I can work with. And whether it's divorce, sticking it out, whatever it may be, I think we'll find the right answer for them. When you've got people who aren't open to hearing what God has to say, don't want to be told no, this and that, well, wherever you're at, you're already in rebellion against God. So whether you get divorced or stayed married, you're just in a bad place. And it's probably why your marriage is in a bad place too. I like the saying, there's no such thing as marriage problems, just lordship problems. When two people are obeying the Lord and loving the Lord, they don't have marriage problems. Boy, I love the Lord and I have marriage. Well, in the moment you had the marriage problem, were you loving the Lord in that moment? I'm not talking about on the whole. I'm talking on a moment-by-moment basis. There are many moments where I am not serving the Lord like I should be because I'm not serving my wife like I should be. And so just remembering that it's all about serving the Lord and being obedient to Him. And if you're concerned sincerely with just serving the Lord and being obedient to Him, well then, for whatever reason, if divorce ever somehow came on the horizon of your life, if you're truly just serving the Lord and being obedient to Him, He's going to take care of it, and you can have peace about the decisions you make. So, difficult subject. I will clarify one last time. I gave no blanket statement saying it's okay to get divorced in certain scenarios, but I'll stand by my statement that when you study it in context, there obviously is more than just adultery. And the whole idea of remarrying, it seems much more clear that Jesus is talking about remarrying someone in a scenario that's tied to your divorce. I'm divorcing them and I'm going to go date this person, right? The girl I had on standby. It's like, no, that's an adulterous thing you just did there. You left your wife to go be with another, and that's wrong. All right. God bless you guys. Hopefully the next Bible study you log on to will be more cheery than this one, but we teach what we're at. And tomorrow we're skipping 13 to 16 because we already covered that last week. We jumped ahead and tied in two texts to teach about Jesus blessing the children. So we'll be on to verse 17 in the rich young ruler. All right. You guys take care. Have a great day. And I'll see you guys around.